What if I told you that right now, as you're watching this video, you're being remote controlled by dead economists, and you volunteered that every thought you think, every desire you feel, every choice you make has been carefully manufactured by forces you've never consciously noticed? Here's a disturbing example. Remember Cambridge Analytica? They didn't just steal data. They weaponized something Karl Marx predicted 150 years ago. By micro-targeting psychographic profiles, they convinced working-class voters in Rust Belt states that tax cuts for billionaires would restore their dignity. It worked because it tapped into a culturally encoded belief that real Americans side with the wealthy against elites. Picture this. You wake up craving a specific brand of coffee that appeared in your Instagram feed. You scroll through social media and feel angry about the exact same things as millions of other people. You vote for politicians who promise change but deliver more of the same. You work 3 jobs and still can't afford healthcare, yet somehow blame yourself for not working harder. These aren't coincidences. They're the result of what Marx called false consciousness, a system so sophisticated that its victims defend it voluntarily. And here's what makes this truly terrifying. It's not happening to other people. It's happening to you right now. As you watch this video, algorithms are analyzing your micro-expressions. Your economic anxiety is being monetized. Your political anger is being harvested. Your deepest insecurities are being cataloged and sold to the highest bidder. This isn't science fiction. This is the reality Marx predicted 150 years ago. But before we dive deeper, I have to ask, when was the last time you questioned whether your online interests actually came from you or were subtly shaped by an algorithm designed to keep you scrolling? Keep that question in mind as we explore the most important theory about human control ever conceived. Meet Karl Marx. He wasn't your typical revolutionary sitting in a library dreaming of utopia. He was a German philosopher who watched the Industrial Revolution transform human beings into economic machines. Born in 1818 into a middle-class family, his father, Heinrich, was a successful lawyer who had converted from Judaism to Christianity to advance his career. Marx had every reason to believe in the system that was making his family prosperous. But as he witnessed the birth of modern capitalism, Marx discovered something that shattered his faith in human freedom. Marx watched as millions of people voluntarily entered factories where they worked 16-hour days in dangerous conditions for wages that barely kept them alive. But here's what disturbed him most. These weren't slaves being forced at gunpoint. These were free people who genuinely believed this system was good for them. They defended the very system that was destroying their lives. Marx realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in human history, the creation of willing slaves who loved their chains. From his exile in London, studying in the British Museum, Marx wrote what would become his most chilling observation. The ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. What he meant was that the people in power don't just control resources, they control thoughts. They don't just own the means of production, they own the means of perception. Marx discovered that the most effective form of control isn't physical force. It's making people believe that their oppression is actually their freedom. Marx called this false consciousness, the idea that people can be made to act against their own interests while believing they're acting in their own interests. But this wasn't just about factory workers. Marx realized he had discovered a universal principle of human control. Any system that benefits a small group at the expense of everyone else must convince the majority that this arrangement is natural, inevitable, and good. The genius isn't in the oppression, it's in making the oppressed grateful for their oppression. When Marx talked about ideology, he wasn't talking about political beliefs. He was describing something far more insidious, the way reality itself gets constructed in people's minds. Marx argued that those who control economic production also control the production of ideas. They don't just tell you what to think, they control what seems thinkable. They don't just shape your opinions, they shape your perception of what's possible. Here's how it works. The people who own the means of production also own the means of communication. The same corporations that profit from your labor also profit from your attention. They don't just want your work, they want your mind. Because if they can control how you think about work, about success, about failure, about yourself, they can make you complicit in your own exploitation. Marx saw that the real product of capitalism isn't goods, it's consciousness, the consciousness that makes people grateful to be used. Consider how we talk about education today. It's rarely about learning or curiosity. Instead, we frame it as an investment in human capital that should yield a measurable return. We've turned the profound human experience of learning into a commodity transaction. The same pattern appears everywhere. Dating apps gamify romance, turning human connection into a marketplace where we swipe through potential partners like products. Social media transforms friendship into engagement metrics. Even our hobbies become side hustles that must generate income to be considered worthwhile. Can you think of an area of your life that hasn't been touched by this economic frame?
Modern neuroscience has confirmed what Marx intuited 150 years ago. Dr. Tim Kasser's research at Knox College demonstrates this perfectly. His studies show that people who prioritize wealth and image over relationships and personal growth report higher levels of anxiety and depression. But here's the kicker. These materialistic values aren't natural human instincts. They're learned responses to a culture that profits from our insecurities. Kasser's experiments revealed that even brief exposure to materialistic messages measurably increased people's focus on wealth and status in subsequent tests. A 2023 study had subjects read statements challenging their political beliefs. When conservatives heard "taxing the rich funds innovation," or liberals heard "border security protects workers," their amygdala fear center lit up like a grenade blast before their cortex could logically process it. This is Marx's social being determines consciousness in your synapses. Ideology isn't just ideas, it's neural pathways treating dissent as literal threat. Dr. Mauricio Delgado's research at Rutgers University uses brain imaging to study how social hierarchies affect neural processing. When participants believed they were lower in a social hierarchy, their brains showed decreased activity in regions associated with executive control and increased activity in areas linked to threat detection and stress response. Their neural architecture was being reshaped by their social position, making them more likely to accept authority and less likely to question existing arrangements. But here's the disturbing part. Many defended the very hierarchical system that was harming them. Marx witnessed the birth of mass media through newspapers and early radio, but we're living through something exponentially more dangerous. We've gone from mass media to personalized manipulation. Every click, every pause, every micro-expression is being analyzed by artificial intelligence systems designed to find and exploit your psychological vulnerabilities. The ruling class Marx wrote about now has real-time access to your subconscious mind. Dr. Shoshana Zuboff's research on surveillance capitalism at Harvard describes how tech companies have moved beyond simply collecting data about what we do. They now use that data to influence what we'll do next. Every scroll, click, and pause is analyzed to create psychological profiles more detailed than we have of ourselves. These platforms then sell access to our attention to the highest bidder, who uses sophisticated behavioral psychology to influence our beliefs, desires, and actions. But here's what makes this especially insidious. The algorithm learns to give us content that confirms our existing biases, while gradually shifting our views in profitable directions. A person concerned about their appearance might start seeing fitness content, which slowly morphs into diet culture, which eventually leads to expensive supplements and procedures. Someone interested in financial independence might be gradually guided toward cryptocurrency schemes or expensive business courses. Recent studies by Dr. Guillaume Chasselat, who formerly worked on YouTube's recommendation algorithm, revealed that the platform's AI was specifically designed to maximize watch time by gradually leading users toward more extreme content. Moderate political videos led to increasingly partisan content. Casual fitness videos led to extreme diet and exercise regimens. The algorithm had learned that emotional arousal, anger, fear, excitement, kept people watching longer, so it systematically pushed users toward more extreme versions of whatever they were initially interested in. We see Marx's theory playing out everywhere. Gig economy workers defending companies that classify them as independent contractors while denying them benefits. Students going into debt for degrees that won't lead to jobs that pay enough to repay the debt. Voters supporting politicians who consistently vote against their economic interests. In each case, people are acting against their own interests while believing they're acting rationally. 6 corporations control 90% of American media. The same companies that profit from keeping wages low also control the narrative about why wages are low. The same pharmaceutical companies that profit from treating depression also fund research about the causes of depression. The same tech companies that profit from addiction also control the conversation about digital wellness. Marx called this the superstructure, the way economic power translates into cultural power. Think about your own life right now. How many of your desires were created by advertising? How many of your fears were amplified by news media? How many of your political opinions came from sources funded by people who profit from those opinions? Marx argued that false consciousness isn't a personal failing, it's a systemic feature. When the entire information environment is designed to serve the interests of capital, individual resistance becomes almost impossible. Consider how hustle culture operates today. The idea that your worth is determined by your productivity and that rest is laziness has become so pervasive that people feel guilty for taking vacations. This isn't natural human behavior. Anthropological evidence, including Marshall Sahlins' influential work, suggests that hunter-gatherer societies typically worked 3 to 4 hours per day. But we've been culturally encoded to see constant work as virtue. Marx would argue this conditioning serves the interests of those who profit from our labor, not our own well-being. Here's what Marx couldn't have predicted. AI systems that know you better than you know yourself. Algorithms that can predict your behavior with 95% accuracy. Recommendation engines that can gradually shift your worldview without you noticing. We're not just dealing with propaganda anymore, we're dealing with personalized reality manipulation at a scale Marx never imagined. The question isn't whether you're being manipulated. The question is whether you're aware of it. Your phone knows when you're depressed before you do. Your search history reveals your deepest insecurities. Your shopping patterns predict your future behavior. Your social connections map your influence networks. All of this data is being used to create a personalized version of reality designed to keep you consuming, working, and voting in ways that benefit the people who own the algorithms. Think about the last time you bought something you didn't really need. The last time you felt outraged about a news story. The last time you shared something on social media without fact-checking it. Marx would argue that none of these were really your choices. They were the predictable result of a system designed to manufacture your consent to your own exploitation. We saw this play out in real time during COVID. Doctors, engineers, and lawyers, people with demonstrated analytical abilities, began sharing debunked theories about vaccines and treatments. These weren't failures of intelligence, they were failures of intellectual independence under unprecedented pressure. When you feel guilty for resting, whose voice is telling you that productivity equals worth? When you feel inadequate scrolling through social media, whose standards are shaping your definition of success? Often these voices aren't even ours. They're internalized messages from parents, culture, advertising that we've mistaken for personal truth. The economic incentives are clearer than ever. Social media platforms make more money when you're angry, anxious, and addicted. News outlets get more clicks with outrage than nuance. Politicians win elections with simple slogans rather than complex solutions. When people are working multiple jobs, drowning in debt, and constantly bombarded with information, intellectual surrender becomes a survival strategy. Dr. Sendhil Mullainathan's research on scarcity provides psychological backing for this insight. His studies show that financial stress literally impairs cognitive function, making it harder for people to make good decisions. The stress of scarcity creates a psychological tunnel vision that makes it almost impossible to think creatively about solutions.
So how do we fight back? Marx believed that breaking free from false consciousness requires what he called class consciousness, the recognition that your individual problems are actually systemic problems, that your personal struggles are shared by millions of others, that the system isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed to benefit a small group at everyone else's expense. But developing this consciousness in the digital age requires new strategies. Here's your common sense audit. For 1 week, write down 5 things you believe are obviously true about success, human nature, or how the world works. Then question them. When did you start believing these things? What did people believe before these ideas became common sense? For example, the notion that hard work always leads to success didn't become dominant until the Protestant work ethic collided with the rise of industrial capitalism. Try media archaeology. Once a week, make time to deliberately consume media that challenges your usual perspective. Not to blindly agree, but to notice how unfamiliar ideas can reveal the invisible scaffolding holding up your current worldview. Before accepting any information, ask who profits from you believing it? Who funded this research? Who owns this platform? Who benefits if you feel angry, afraid, or inadequate? Practice metacognitive awareness. Start paying attention to the internal voices that guide your daily choices. When you feel guilty for resting, whose voice is telling you that productivity equals worth? When you feel inadequate scrolling through social media, whose standards are shaping your definition of success? Often these voices aren't even ours. They're internalized messages from parents, culture, advertising that we've mistaken for personal truth. Follow the money. Marx taught us that economic interests ultimately drive ideological production. When you see a news story, a social media trend, a political movement, ask who benefits economically from this narrative? Who profits if people believe this? Who loses if they don't? This isn't cynicism, it's the basic literacy Marx argued was necessary for intellectual freedom. But individual awareness isn't enough. Marx understood that false consciousness is maintained by systemic forces that require collective resistance. This means supporting independent media that isn't funded by corporate interests. It means demanding transparency in algorithmic systems. It means recognizing that your liberation is connected to everyone else's liberation. The ruling class wants you to think your problems are personal. Marx showed us they're political. Here's a powerful recent example of collective consciousness raising in action. The fight for 15 minimum wage campaigns succeeded not just through traditional organizing, but by reframing the entire conversation. Instead of accepting that some jobs are entry-level and naturally low-paid, organizers helped people recognize that calling jobs entry-level was ideological. It justified poverty wages by suggesting workers would naturally progress to better positions, when data showed most remained trapped in low-wage work. By shifting the conversation from entry-level jobs to survival wages, they exposed how language itself had been shaped to serve corporate interests. Think of consciousness like a muscle. If you only exercise it in one direction, it becomes weak in every other direction. Social media algorithms are like having a personal trainer who only lets you do bicep curls. You feel strong, but you're actually becoming unbalanced and weak. Marx argued that true strength comes from understanding the systems that shape your thoughts and choosing to think independently even when it's difficult. Marx spent his life in poverty and exile for refusing to accept that human beings were meant to be economic machines. He died in 1883, having seen only the beginning of the system he critiqued. His family lived in constant financial insecurity because he refused to use his intellect to serve the interests of capital. His sacrifice wasn't just personal, it was about defending the possibility of human consciousness against systems designed to eliminate it. But here's what makes Marx's warning more urgent than ever. We're not just dealing with economic exploitation anymore, we're dealing with consciousness exploitation on an industrial scale. Every aspect of human experience is being monetized. Your attention, your emotions, your relationships, your dreams. The question Marx leaves us with isn't just who owns the means of production, it's who owns the means of consciousness, and the answer should terrify you. Marx argued that history is the story of class struggle, but in the digital age, it's become the story of consciousness struggle. The battle isn't just over who controls resources, it's over who controls reality itself. Every time you mindlessly scroll, every time you buy something you don't need, every time you vote against your own interests, you're choosing sides in this struggle. The question is, are you choosing consciously? The tragedy is that intellectual surrender often feels like liberation. Thinking is hard work. It's uncomfortable to hold complex, contradictory ideas in your mind simultaneously. It's painful to admit that you might be wrong about something important. But Marx argued that this discomfort is the price of remaining human.
In a world that profits from our unconsciousness, choosing to think for ourselves becomes a radical act. This brings us to perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of all. We're all susceptible to false consciousness. The moment we think we're immune, we've already begun to succumb. The price of intellectual freedom is eternal vigilance, not against external enemies, but against our own tendency to stop thinking when thinking becomes difficult. History shows us powerful examples of communities that have successfully resisted ideological control. Indigenous communities worldwide maintain economic systems based on reciprocity rather than accumulation. Worker cooperatives like Mondragon in Spain demonstrate alternatives to hierarchical workplace relationships. The universal healthcare movements in multiple countries have successfully reframed health as a fundamental right rather than a commodity. What these movements share is what Marx called critical consciousness, the collective recognition that current arrangements aren't natural laws but human choices that can be changed. The most effective resistance to false consciousness happens when communities create spaces for honest dialogue about their shared reality. Book clubs, discussion groups, even informal conversations where people feel safe to question common sense. These become laboratories for authentic thinking. Here's my challenge to you this week. Choose one belief you hold strongly about politics, economics, or society and spend 30 minutes researching who profits from you believing it. Not to become paranoid, but to practice the kind of consciousness Marx died defending. Trace the funding sources, question the motivations, follow the money. If your belief survives this scrutiny, you'll hold it more consciously. If it doesn't, you'll have learned something valuable about the difference between your thoughts and thoughts that have been manufactured for you. If this video has made you question something you thought you knew for certain, that's not confusion. It's the beginning of consciousness. Share this with someone who isn't afraid to think critically about the systems that shape their thoughts. Because in a world designed to profit from our unconsciousness, the simple act of thinking clearly becomes the most radical thing you can do. Every time you question a narrative that serves power, every time you resist an algorithm designed to manipulate you, every time you choose consciousness over comfort, you're not just protecting your own mind, you're defending the very possibility of human freedom in an age of manufactured consent. What's one belief you're willing to examine this week? Let me know in the comments. And let's commit to being the kind of people who think for themselves when everyone else has stopped thinking altogether. Tonight, when you're scrolling, pause and ask yourself, is this my desire or just an algorithm's profit plan? That question alone is a quiet act of rebellion.